Have you ever woken up one day thinking your life was under control, and suddenly everything collapsed? What once felt secure began to fall apart without warning. The ground disappeared. The future became unclear. The heart shifted into survival mode. Maybe you didn't lose everything at once the way Job did. But maybe you lost something that was holding up your identity, your peace, your sense of direction. And when that happens, it's not only the loss that hurts, it's the silence that comes afterward. The silence of answers that never come. The silence of prayers that seem unable to break through the ceiling. And the question begins to echo inside. Is God still here? Or am I going through this alone? This is not a story about someone who had perfect faith. It is the story of someone who kept walking even when God seemed silent. And maybe this is also your story right now, when everyone is around. Who Job was before the pain arrived. The Bible describes him as upright, God-fearing, and someone who did what was right, even when no one was watching. He had many possessions, many children, many servants, and, of course, many people around him. His voice was heard, his presence was valued, his name carried social weight. While everything was in order, Job never experienced spiritual loneliness. But notice a subtle detail. Human presence seemed abundant as long as prosperity existed. Friends, respect, and honor walked side by side with visible results. This raises an uncomfortable question for you today. How many people are close because of who you are? And how many are close because of what you have? This seed begins to prepare the ground for something deeper, because when sudden loss arrives, it does not only test faith, it reveals how conditional human interest truly is, and that completely changes the landscape that follows. Loss does not come gradually. Some losses give no warning, they simply happen. With Job, everything collapsed on the same day. Possessions destroyed, children dead, emotional structure in collapse. Today this looks very much like suddenly losing a job, receiving news of the death of someone you love, watching a marriage fall apart, or having something taken from your hands without explanation. There is no time to prepare, only to feel. Sudden loss leaves the soul disoriented and the heart without ground. The hardest part is not only what you lost, it is the silence that comes afterward. You search for meaning, but find unanswered pain, suffering without explanation, and a faith that must exist without relief. It is when you pray, and it seems that nothing comes back, nothing improves, nothing responds. This moment introduces the silence of God, where human suffering tests everything you believe. And it is exactly here that the story begins to grow even deeper. Because the pain does not end with the loss, it continues in the eyes of others. When identity collapses, after losing everything around him, Job now loses his own health. His body becomes the visible stage of pain, marked, wounded, exposed. The man who was once respected is now sitting in ashes, isolated, dealing with public shame and deep suffering. When the body breaks, the soul begins to cry out with questions that never needed to be asked before. It is at this point that broken identity stops being theory and becomes experience. Today this happens when you get sick, when the body no longer responds, when appearance changes, or when a limitation arrives without invitation. It may be an unexpected diagnosis, emotional exhaustion, an anxiety crisis that paralyzes you, or silent depression. Suddenly you are no longer the strong one, the productive one, the reliable one. Human suffering begins to define how others see you, and the pain of the soul starts asking who you are without what once sustained you. And this question prepares the ground for the confrontation that comes next. The silence of God is deafening. God's silence does not hurt because God is absent. It hurts because you cannot understand what is happening. You keep praying. You keep trying to trust. You keep waiting for some kind of change. But nothing moves. It is like speaking in an empty room, and that wears down the soul. Maybe you are living exactly this right now. You believe, but you are tired. You trust, but you are confused. You have not given up, but you are exhausted from waiting. And it is at this point that faith stops being just words and becomes silent endurance. Friends arrive, but not to heal. When Job's pain becomes visible, his friends finally arrive. They sit with him on the ground in silence for 7 full days. And, interestingly, in this first moment, they do everything right. They do not explain. They do not accuse. They do not try to fix the pain. They simply remain there, because some wounds do not ask for words. They ask for presence. When you go through a loss, grief, or deep crisis, sometimes what helps most is not advice, but someone who stays, someone who does not minimize the pain of the soul, nor turn suffering into a sermon. This kind of human silence heals more than ready-made speeches. But here is the important warning. This balance does not always last, and that is exactly where the story begins to change its tone when interest is revealed. As time passes, the silence of Job's friends gives way to words, and they hurt more than the initial pain. They begin to accuse, to explain the unexplainable, to link unjust suffering to some kind of hidden guilt. Compassion is replaced by spiritual accusation, and pain turns into theological debate. Instead of welcoming the pain of the soul, they try to protect their own worldview. When they do not understand suffering, they choose to judge. This happens today, when after losing everything, you realize who is truly with you. When there was prosperity, many were around. When loss came, only judgment remained. People who once praised you now explain your pain as error, lack of faith, or punishment. Conditioned human interest reveals itself when empathy disappears, along with the benefits. And this kind of abandonment deepens social isolation even more, preparing the stage for a faith that no longer depends on anyone's approval. Pain without answers. There comes a moment when Job stops arguing with people and begins to seek God directly. He searches, calls out, walks back and forth, and does not find him. There is no answer, no explanation, no visible sign from heaven. Even so, he keeps speaking, keeps waiting, keeps positioning himself before God. This is faith in the midst of silence, when the heart persists even without feeling any return. This is perhaps the hardest part of the spiritual journey today. When you pray, fast, try to remain firm, but live under the weight of when God does not respond. It is not lack of faith. It is faith without relief. It is continuing to believe even with unanswered pain, even with divine silence. Here a mature faith is born, one that doesn't depend on feeling, only on remaining. And this prepares your heart for something that has not been revealed. God speaks, but does not explain. After so much divine silence, God finally speaks to Job. But notice, he does not answer the direct questions. He does not explain the cause of the pain. He does not offer justifications. Instead, God reveals his greatness, his authority, his wisdom that goes beyond human logic. The focus shifts from, "Why did this happen to me?" to, "Who is in control of all this?" Sometimes, God's presence is worth more than any answer. This strongly confronts our expectations today, because you want explanation, closure, clear meaning. But God knows that some pains are not resolved with information, but with revelation. When he reveals himself, deep pain does not disappear immediately, but the crisis of faith loses its power. It is in this shift, from reason to presence, that the soul begins to breathe again, preparing the heart for a kind of restoration that does not come through understanding, but through trust. Job was not strong all the time. Job did not prevail because he was patient all the time, nor because he maintained unshakable faith without cracks. He prevailed because he chose to remain in faith, even when God's silence seemed louder than any promise. There was unanswered pain, faith without relief, and a tired heart that kept speaking to God. This is not idealized strength. It is real spiritual endurance. It is choosing not to walk away, even without understanding. The story of Job is not, at its core, about restored prosperity or quick happy endings. It speaks of identity preserved in the midst of suffering without explanation, when everything around tries to reduce you. Job lost possessions, health, reputation, and friends, but he didn't completely lose who he was before God. In the middle of biblical suffering, something was preserved on the inside, and that is rarer and more valuable than any external restoration, because not every faith is rewarded quickly, and you already know that from life. But every true faith learns to remain when there is abandonment by people, spiritual loneliness, and existential questioning. This is mature faith, the kind that crosses divine silence without running away. And maybe this conclusion is not an ending, but a quiet invitation for you to look at your own story and realize that you are still standing. If this story touched you in any way, if you are also learning to remain even in the silence, write in the comments, "I continue to believe, even when God is silent." Maybe your journey is not being seen by anyone right now, but it is being built where it matters most. Prayer, Lord, you know the pain that found no answer, and the faith that continued even without relief. Sustain those who are living through your silence without abandoning the path. Give strength to remain when everything seems still, and guard the heart that has decided not to give up. May your presence be enough when explanations do not come. Amen.